Background.
Sorry about that.
No, that's okay. It's like one of those bloopers on television. They didn't know the camera was on yet, but it's okay. It doesn't bother me at all.
Okay.
Yeah, no, it's no problem at all.
Sorry about that.
No, it's good.
We're still getting everything set up. We just moved here, so.
Oh, to a new home or a new state?
New state.
Oh, where were you before, if you don't
San
mind?
Diego.
Oh, I was in San Diego for 2 years, actually El Cajon.
Oh, okay. Yeah,
Yeah.
we were La Mesa.
Oh yeah, okay, cool.
Mhm.
Yeah, I missed the beaches, but hey, what can I say?
At least you get weather seasons here.
Yeah, yeah. I used to play Torrey Pines.
Okay.
Yeah, like I said, I'm a golfaholic, so being that close to La Jolla just worked out well. And I mean, a PGA course that's public.
Hmm.
Yeah, that was perfect.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, welcome to Virginia.
Thank you.
Hi, Kayla.
Hello.
Olivia's trying to navigate her way in. Hi, Olivia.
Hi.
Emma, nice chewing gum. Hi. Let's see. Oh, we have Orlana. Oh, she's got a green screen. How you doing? Okay, Madison, hello.
Hi, how are you?
I'm good, thank you. Lul,
Hello.
did I pronounce that correctly?
Yeah.
Okay. Hey, Jennifer's got that that hidden look. Hello. David, how are you? That's so good. I can read lips. We're all good. Okay. We got 29, so I think that's about right. Oh, so how are you guys today? Everybody good? Good nods, good nods. I like that. Good. Let's make it a good class. If we got to be here for an hour and some change, let's enjoy it. All right. So, any questions from Monday? Yep. Okay. Good. Kayla, was that sign language? No, I have no questions.
No.
All right. Let's see. Who else do I have in here? I got 29 people, but I guess the others decided not to show themselves. All right. Well, that's all good. Okay, so of course today we're going to get into chapter 1, and it is full of stuff. It is full of stuff. So we will pattern it. I doubt seriously that we will finish it today, but what we will do is at least get into it in great depth, and I will isolate certain things, and I have a video. Of course, I try to keep it interactive for you guys. So before we finish today, I do have a video that I'll share with you, because we'll be talking about fraternal twins and stuff like that, and what happens with it. Now, who can tell me, how are fraternal twins different than identical twins?
Fraternal twins, they have their own separate sacs, like in the womb, and identical twins share the same sac.
Oh, that's right. So how does that happen?
Oh, 100% genetic.
My head. Sorry.
Huh? That's okay. I guess it's back to you, Kayla.
Oh, no, sorry. I didn't mean to interrupt her. They could go first.
No, that's fine. Okay. Who would like to go first? Who was going first? I mean, and I'm trying to figure it out, right? Because during the cycle, the monthly cycle, you only release, or women, I should say, only release one egg. So if you only release one egg, how do you get two sacs? I'm confused.
Isn't it split into two? The one cell splits into two, right?
I don't know. Does it?
For fraternal twins, it's 2 eggs, and it travels up the
Okay.
ovarian tubes. And then for identical twins, it's the same sperm, and the chromosomes divide into 2.
Excellent. That's the deal. Okay. So it's an anomaly. Fraternal twins are really an anomaly. I mean, because very seldom, if ever, is there more than one egg released for fertilization. And so for identical twins, you were right, and I was just messing with you guys. But David was absolutely right. When you have the single egg, normally what happens is the egg will simply duplicate the cells, and so your 46 chromosomes are loaded into every cell, and so every cell becomes a part of your development. With fraternal twins, there are 2 independent, so very seldom do you ever have where you have more than one egg that is released. Because over the life of a woman, and please, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but according to the research, on average, there are only, in a woman's total life, are 400 eggs. So, and only one of those generally, or on average, gets released during the menstrual cycle. So, you can average that out to about from age 13 to about 40 something, 50 something, right? So it is an anomaly, but we'll take a look at that later because there's some twin studies that are done, and it also helps us understand personality and behavior a little bit more. So we'll look at that later. I will show you that video later on, and let's just get into today's stuff. And here's, I believe, where we ended on Monday. So again, lifespan development. As we were talking about the other day, there's a lot of things that are involved with developmental psychology because they look at the transition, the kind of things that they could measure, predict what someone will be like, look like, act like, develop into at particular milestones or particular periods. As I said before, a child, usually when the mother or father or whomever takes the child to the doctor has a chart, and that chart says based on their height, weight, BMI, all of that stuff, it is proposed that they will be on a normal growth projection or not. And so even though we can look at that as a general standard, lifespan also looks at what is it unique, what happens to one group versus another, even culturally and environmentally. And I don't know if you've ever seen the videos, but they quite often show where either fraternal twins have been separated at birth and or identical twins were separated at birth, and their lives are still significantly the same in what they aspire to, what they do. And a lot of it is not necessarily dependent on environment. Some of it is simply genetic predispositions. So we'll take a look at that a little bit more. And then what it means for parental influence. And even as we go through relationships, we'll talk about Sternberg and what the romantic patterns are and how those manifest themselves in different personality constructs. So as we look at that, of course, we'll talk about these things. Fundamental markers. So are there certain periods in life biologically, genetically, whether we talk nature or nurture, that would identify a particular predilection, for males versus females or for anyone who is singularly human? The socioeconomic status, because we do know, as with anything else, at least cognitively, those who are isolated from interaction with others, especially as a child, their prefrontal cortex does not completely form or does not develop as quickly as those who have a lot of interaction, which is why one of the reasons that it is important for children to interact in an open environment and not to be isolated. Now, it doesn't matter whether you're homeschooled or not. It simply means, do you have interaction so that you're learning new experiences? And like we talked on Monday, your experiences will create these levels of information that you have. And subsequently, by storing those information pieces in memory, you can leverage that into a knowledge base. And that knowledge base influences your behaviors and your decisions. Well, not only is that increased or decreased by the group that you grow up with or that you interact with as you're developing, but also what are the things that environmentally create additional experiences that are either more positive or more negative. And right or wrong, socioeconomic status can be a big factor in that. And it can be on both ends of the spectrum. So those on the low socioeconomic status can be impacted negatively or positively. And those on the upper end of the socioeconomic status can be affected negatively or positively. And I know that may seem like, that it's completely separate, but as a state, why would you, what might be your conjecture that people who are movie stars or music stars become enamored or involved with drugs and alcohol? Not all of them do, but a large number do. So what might be your thoughts about why someone would inject drugs and alcohol into a life that you would seemingly think is as close to perfect as we're going to get?
They didn't develop in their childhood like other children do in their normal lives, and they had to grow up so quickly, maybe.
No, that's not a bad answer. Actually, it's a good answer. Any others?
Maybe they were around it a lot. Like that's the people they grew up with because everyone had money.
Okay.
So I think that it's partly because like we think as to them that their life is perfect, but in their minds they have all of these struggles, and they also have everyone looking at them and scrutinizing them and kind of just telling them that what they're doing is wrong. So in their minds, they're going to turn to something that's going to help them.
Okay, good. Thanks, guys. I mean, those are all great answers. They absolutely are, because from this developmental psychology perspective, you're absolutely right. And when I say that, I mean, each of the answers was right. Because if I have someone who, as a result of a socioeconomic condition, was disallowed friendships, disallowed interaction, education, right? Even love from a relationship perspective, then that could impact them at a point where it's hard to separate. I mean, if you think of rap stars, and even though I'm not a big rap music fan, like the Tupacs, the Biggies, the Snoop Dogg's and Dr. Dre's and all of those people and others who may go nameless, right? They grow up in an impoverished environment, right? A low socioeconomic environment. But once they have achieved this multi-millionaire status, they still want to remain connected to the place where they were normalized. And so even then, there's this response or reaction to return to nature, right? Because even though it may have been low socioeconomic status areas, that's where they had the most conditioning, and they know how to navigate through those areas. One of the statements that they say, you can take the boy out of the country, but you can't take the country out of the boy, right? So it's very similar there. So when we look at development at a young age, as Emma said, that can have an impact. Let's see, who was it? I know, Madison, you did the struggling in that. Who was it that offered the rounding? that someone may not be rounded well enough? Who was that?
I said it could be the people they're surrounded with.
Okay, I'm sorry. Who is that? I don't see you.
Olivia Palacios.
Okay, no, I just want to, oh, I see you now. Okay, cool. Okay, so as Olivia said, so what are they, maybe they have some internal questions that were never satisfied. And a lot of artists are really introverts. They're very shy, but they express themselves by being in an environment that allows them this openness and this collection of energy. But after they've finished their performance and all of those, they go right back into a state of reclusion, right? So they may not know how to deal in all of these other environments and cultures that they're being introduced to. And last but not least, the idea of, maybe all of the people around me possibly were also wealthy, but in a lot of instances they weren't. But now gaining wealth and not knowing how to deal with it. I'll give you a statistic that you're not responsible for, but I will give you a statistic that 60% of those who play national football at the top level, National Football League, 60% of them end up broke. 80% of the NBA ends up broke, right? And so it's not that they don't know money. It's just managing it in an environment that they're not accustomed to or used to. And there's not a lot of people who go in and help them manage that, or if they do, they try to take advantage of it. So all of this comes into, or can be a part of, socioeconomic status, culture. Whether it is individualistic culture or collectivist cultures. Collectivist cultures tend to look for the good of the group, for everybody, and they try to assist in having everybody be better. Individualistic cultures tend to look for self, and they only consider the group for what the group can provide for them to help them escalate as an individual. And of course, we know now with gender, LBGTQ, and I think there's another letter, but I can't remember what it is, but we'll stick with that. Now, gender in the 1930s, when we talk about Freud, it was male-female, period. You either acted as a male and you did the things expected of a male, or you were female and you did and acted the way that a female does. And now we know that biologically, that's not necessarily true, because around the age of puberty, females will get their largest or the second largest hormonal injection of estrogen, and boys will get their largest injection of testosterone. And that's simply genetically constructed. However, sometimes the testosterone, instead of it being held back and the estrogen being released, it switches. So now that signal that's supposed to release estrogen releases testosterone. So it really can biologically be a woman in a man's body or a man in a woman's body. It is absolutely possible that chemically and biologically that happens. So now, based on culture and gender, what's acceptable, what's not acceptable? What are the issues that someone has to deal with, and how does that become a barrier to their development? As I said before, because we are biologically and cognitively and emotionally structured throughout our development, our bodies know when to turn off and turn on most times. So our bodies, if we're depressed or sad, creates a certain chemical to support that state. If we are happy and elated, our bodies produce a chemical to support that state. So if we stay in a state too long of sadness or even euphoria, it affects the natural state of the body, the chemical balances of the body, which creates issues. So all of those things can impact not only how we develop, but to what degree we develop. Now, of course, we hope that there are normative transitions, as shown on the screen, that there are predictable life changes that occur during development. So we know pretty much that when a child is born, his or her eyesight is about 2400 to 2600. Don't really see. But we know that if things are normal and they're normal transitions, then around the age of 2 or 3, eyesight happens. We know that around the age of 3, until the age of 3, humans cannot create a conscious memory. And then we also know that around the age of 13, puberty happens, and that chemical injection happens that creates more of our gender, which is male or female. And then around the age of 23 for women, the prefrontal cortex is fully developed, and around 25 for men, the prefrontal cortex. So there are some things that we know and are predicted. But there are other things dependent on environment, culture, chemistry that can be impacted. So there are non-normative transitions, so things that just are not a part of what we have researched and say would be normalized. And that could be as a result of trauma. It can be as a result of a physical or mental accident. And of course, it could be as a result of chemistry. So drugs, whether they are prescription or illegal, that are introduced can cause a problem. And we know specifically that during the fetal and embryonic stage, if a drug that counteracts the normal functioning of the body is introduced, it can affect the development of a child. So let's see. So some of the things, again, we'll take a look at all of this. This being chapter 1 is more of an introduction into the entire book. But we will talk about how we measure groups of people and how we measure lifespan over a period of time for an individual or a cohort. And so the cohort is simply this. And let's distinguish, since we have multi-generations, for the first time in history, starting around 2015, 2016 was the first time we had 5 generations in the workforce at the same time. So if you were born prior to 1945, you're considered a traditional. And these will not be exact, but they will be close enough for government work. So from 1945 to around 1964, on average, baby boomers. From 64 to around 81 are Generation X. 81 to around 94, 95 are, no, I'm sorry, wait a minute, what did I miss? Generation X. Yeah, 96 millennials. And then after 96 on average, again, depending on which research you look at, or after 96, then we have the Gen Y. And after 2006, I think, is the next gens. I don't even know that they put a letter on them yet. But when you think about that, our interactions are not distinctly different, right? Because every generation has fundamental ideas about success, about security, about achievement, and even about relationships. Now, they may shift as we go through different generations, but it's not a significant shift. There's no period when someone, again, as an average group for humans, have not sought out procreation, have not sought out relationships, have not sought out a career that allows them an opportunity to retire or to live a comfortable life. And even in the pursuit of things, if you look at traditionals, they didn't have computers then. They had an abacus and a piece of paper. However, the information that they needed in order to be successful then was transferred person to person. As you got into the baby boomer stage, now around, there still wasn't a prevalence of computers, but they did have mainframes and even with calculators. Information became more independently achieved but there was still the use of information to try to increase their probability for success. In the 1980s, once we got into Gen X and we started with PCs, personal computers, still the access to information, but now this desire or the need for personalization was not as great, but they still had the need for success. Then once you got into millennials and Gen Y and the next gens, this idea of person-to-person need for sharing of information becomes even less. And it's interesting because it's less and it's more. It's less substantiated information, but it's more generalized information. So now you don't have to research anything to find out what the information is. You just go on Wikipedia or social media, Facebook or Twitter or Instagram or something like that, and everybody's got an opinion. And for a lot of people, those opinions matter, even though they aren't substantiated. So that's when we look at the lifespan and what generations are impacted by differences. How would I, if I were an organizational development specialist, go into an organization, go into a school like Nova, where I've got someone who represents every one of these generations and offer a curriculum that is of value to each. Gen Y, millennials, next gen would appreciate, or I believe, have a higher appreciation for electronics and technology. A traditional or baby boomer probably likes more of the face-to-face, right? So that's what we would look at and figure out, you know, what developmental cycles impact people differently. So the maximum lifespan currently, now this is average and it's high average. The biological limit of human life is around 105 years. However, there are some people who exceed that. There was a person the other day who was 114, I believe.
Yeah, I've heard of 122, I think, record, but it wasn't really proven or anything, though. Not too much scientific backing that up.
Yeah, they actually showed this person that was 114, but that is huge. And of course, if you still have your faculties, that's in itself. Because the average lifespan for most people, if you are of Asian descent or African descent, and even Latin descent, the average lifespan is around 80. If you're European, it's closer to 85 to 90 for males. And then for women, you just add 5 years onto either of those. So we still look at what the impact is, even as it relates to race and ethnicity, and of course, gender as well. What we will also take a look at as we look at the lifespan or discuss the lifespan is
generation, I had a question, is generation like 20 years then, or?
It's on average about 20 years.
Okay.
Yep, it averages 18 to 20 years in most instances. There's some deviation because it also depends on the number born in that particular series. So sometimes they may extend it 1 or 2 years. So early conceptions of childhood, for boys and girls, part of the labor force, right? So the early conception of childhood was you go to work because the family needs everybody to work. Now, again, this was average, not everyone. But once a child hit teenage years, more specifically, once they hit the adolescence phase, especially in socioeconomically challenged areas, children were expected to go to work. They dropped out of school, especially for those in the traditionals. In traditionals, and using that term loosely, fathers were expected to be the breadwinners. Excuse me. Moms were not expected to be breadwinners. Moms were expected to take care of the children. That was it. Not to go out and work, not to get a job. They were to take care of the family, and the father was responsible for everything else. Right? So even in the 1920s and 1930s, a female, if she was older than 12 or 13 and wasn't married, she was a spinster. So as soon as puberty hit, they were supposed to be married, having kids. The boys were also already supposed to be able to take care of their families and, make ends meet. Now, that was also single family income. As we moved into the latter part of baby boomers and even the mid part of baby boomers, because of the economic change, you started seeing more instances where it was almost a requirement for two family incomes, or dual family income. So now it wasn't realistic for mom not necessarily to work, but mom and dad had to bring income to afford a house and everything else associated with it. Now we've gone to a point where it's a level of independence. I don't have to be reliant on a relationship in order for me to be successful. A young lady can have her own future, her own job, her own house. A young man can have his own job, own future, own house. And there is no real requirement anymore that in order to be successful, it needs to be a dual family. Right? So all of this changes, but we have to understand the dynamic of that, because if I'm a marketer, if I'm an organization, if I'm a product manufacturer, then I need to modify the service products and services so it fits within the dynamic of that particular generation. So Locke and Rousseau pretty much believed that we as a world, we corrupt people. So they both believed that children are simply born in innocence because the only thing they have is their blueprint. And they are born without the ideas of hate or sin or anything else. Because, I mean, looking at it, sin and negativism, positivism, all of those things come as a comparative. So once we enter into our lives, we look at what is good, bad, negative, positive, but as a result of comparing it to someone who doesn't have, then we start to create these perspectives of the differences. So Rousseau and Locke both said, look, if we start now, Locke, the tabula rasa simply means that children are born as a blank slate. And since they're born as a blank slate, we write externally, caregivers and all of those write onto that slate and create for them what is considered normal or abnormal, good or bad, right or wrong. So Rousseau says very simply as well, there is an innocence because they don't have experiences to judge between right or wrong. There is no dichotomous state. So subsequently, these ideas that are part of childhood change significantly based on the culture and the environment that we're in. And of course, then we'll go into emerging adulthood. We'll talk about young adulthood, middle adulthood, late adulthood. But emerging adulthood, when you're coming out of adolescence into what would be considered adulthood, that phase of life that begins after high school. And it really fits with the 3 boxes I shared with you guys on Monday, that if our personalities become the construct of how we make decisions and influences our behavior, then it fits with this emerging adulthood phase of life, because that's when you separate. Generally, 18 is the graduation year. Some, of course, will be 19, some will be 17, but on average, around the age of 18, you graduate from high school, and that's when you can start to construct your own life, if you will. So it fits. All right. So, of course, now, social networking, good or bad, I won't share my opinion, but social networking can be used to connect, or it can be used to separate. Facebook, I don't know if MySpace is still around, but some of the others that are supposed to connect people together, given that there are 6 degrees of separation, now has depersonalized the nature of how we developed and interact socially. And you can research this, of course, on your own, but social media allows us to be stupid. If I were to approach you as person to person, I would be careful of what I'm projecting, because now it's associated with me as an individual, as a person. But I can go on social media and create an entirely different persona that you have no idea who I am, where I am, and what I'm about. And so I can do anything stupid that I want up there, and I remain anonymous. So people tend to get very courageous and bold when they can hide their identities. So yes, cyberspace can be good for connection, but it can also be good for unresolved conflicts and people hiding their true identities. Income inequalities. Now, as early, and I'm trying to remember when I saw this data, I think the data was from 1968. But in 1968, there was a study that said, if you were to look at the top either 10 or 16 families in America, and you were to take $100,000 from those families and distribute it to every family in America, it wouldn't have put a dent in the wealth of those 16 families. So you think we've got 30+ million people or more in the US, that you could have taken $100,000 and given to every family in the US, and it wouldn't have put a dent in the wealth of those 16 families. Now in 2020, it is very similar. 2% of America owns 90% of the wealth of America. So think of that as a segregation norm, right? In the medieval times, countries like Britain and some other countries segregated their citizens by affluency. And some literally believed that if you were poor, you were supposed to be poor. If you were rich, you were supposed to be rich. And you deserved all of the accolades or the problems associated with being rich or poor. And I'm not, trust me, I'm not disparaging other groups who have emperors or dictators or kings or something like that. Whatever works for the country is whatever works for the country. But think about, and I'll use Great Britain as an example, but only as an example, those who are born of that bloodline never have to work. And the rest of the country is responsible for paying for their livelihoods. And those who are born poor, it is assumed that that is the state of their life and that's where they should be. So think of that as we have this gap between rich and poor within any nation. It's going to create an avenue of difference that causes problems. And I will offer this. Those at the top is actually really psychologically brilliant. That if I keep everyone in the lower echelon fighting with each other, then they don't look at what's happening at the top, which is where most of the influence is coming from. Right? So as a developmental perspective, we can also condition people within any nation, any environment, to be subject to negative or positive influence. So again, developmental psychologists look at how those environments, how the cultures, how the genders, how all of those things, given the state or the dynamics of that environment, cause problems, disparity, or success and prosperity. So again, simply the socioeconomic status on the education and income rungs. We will talk about intelligence later, but it also has an application for socioeconomic status. developed world nations, nation defined by their affluence or high medium per person incomes. All right, we won't spend a lot of time on that, but it does have impact because even there, if they're in a nation that is not defined by affluence, then access to medicine, to education, all of those things become developmental barriers, either cognitively, emotionally, or even biologically. So we'll take a look at those, but we'll look at those just briefly. And as I shared before, depending on whether you're from a collectivist culture and individualistic culture, it almost defines how well your culture, your group, your cohort are successful or not. Now, according to current research, Asian cultures, Aztec cultures tend to be high in collectivist natures, meaning that they tend to look for the good of the larger order. So someone who is going to take a promotion in a collectivist culture, they look at how that promotion represents their family, how it represents others, and it becomes a sign of respect and even reward for having done things that promote the good of the larger group. In individualistic cultures, tends to be a greater emphasis on independence. So let's even look at you as students. Those who are from a collectivist culture you will see almost intuitively form study groups. And even if it's not just to study, it's to interact, to have a sense of connection. Individualistic cultures may be afraid to study in groups because now as an individual, now I'm opening up the avenue for competition. And if I want to be the #1 student, and if I help you, you may challenge me in being the #1 student. So I tend to be more individual in the way that I approach, even sharing information. Individualistic cultures and organizations tend to be people who are autocratic, authoritarian, and they want to give orders and they don't want to be challenged. So again, as we look at these things organizationally, academically, in families, dependent on the nature of how you approach the good of others or are self-indulgent, may depend on the success developmentally, not only for an individual, but for the group.
That's a question.
Yes.
Is this the same as like honor and dignity cultures?
No, not necessarily.
Okay.
But let me ask you to provide an example, if you will, of either of those.
Of the honor and dignity?
Yes.
I believe that honor is like you take for example, a position where you do it for the well-being or how you grew up. You think it's an honor for your personality, and then I would think that dignity, you're doing that because it's the right thing or something like that.
Okay. All right. So I'm going to say yes, but then I want to expand it a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
So a collectivist culture, I think, is more like the former description that you provided. So when I do something, I look at how it's going to promote the good of those around me, whether it's in an organization that I'm in, whether it's my family, right? So the honor is in creating an atmosphere or a culture of sharing and collective nature, right? An individualistic culture would be more concerned about their own prestige. If I become a CEO or a vice president or something like that, then that's because I believe that everyone else should be supporting my escalation. In a collectivist culture, they believe that everyone supports everyone's escalation. William Uchi, who was a Japanese economist, I think it was called Theory Z, but the idea in traditional Japanese companies, if the company was losing profit, then those who were CEOs, vice presidents, anybody of stature would go down to the production line. Nobody was laid off, but everyone chipped in to increase the profits for everybody, so nobody lost their honor or respect. In an individualistic culture, if the company loses profits, they lay people off because they're concerned about what they get. Did that help?
Yes, thank you.
Okay. And the last example I'll provide is this. If you remember, and even though you guys are in the millennial Generation Y stuff, the bailout in the between 2008 and 2000, well, actually it was 2006, but it remained through 2000 whatever, when the banks were bailed out, and there was $7 trillion or whatever to bail the banks out, right? In a collectivist culture, I think the norm would have been, now because we have this money to assist us in recovering, let's look for the benefit for everyone. How do we help everyone recover? But in an individualistic culture, a lot of the money was given to the banks who held these mortgages. And then the banks still gave these executives who created the financial crisis, still gave them $1 million bonuses. And people were losing their homes. So I think that's the difference in a collectivist versus an individualistic culture.
Now, is it possible for a culture to be a mix of the two? Does it have to be a dichotomy?
It is a dichotomy, but it doesn't have to be an explicit dichotomy. So yes, it can exist in variations. I mean, you can have those who are extremely individualistic, but there can be an order underneath them that is still collectivist. Right. So I think an example that may help, think of unions. So unions are collectivists by nature because they represent all of their union members. But you will have management who is separate from union, and management is more focused on the bottom line and what happens to the organization, and the union is more concerned about the larger group. So yeah, you can have both in a country, in a nation, in an organization, and you can have variations of that. Yeah, so it's not one or the other.
Have they ever done any studies on what culture is more happy or what culture is more, I guess, better off? Life expectancy on those?
Collectivist cultures tend to be
more happy, I guess, more fulfilled.
Yes. They tend to be more satisfied because when you, and this, there is research psychologically that says when you try to develop success as an individual, most individuals tend to reach their bar, but because that bar is compared to others and their bars, they continue to reset the bar. So once you become a supervisor, oh, I've got that. Well, in order for me to be successful, I got to be a manager. Once I become a manager, oh, I got to be a director. Once I'm a director, I got to be a vice president. I got to be, all of these things. And so because the bar continues to move as an individual, individuals tend to compare themselves to others. Collectivists tend to share themselves with others. And so if anyone is doing well, everyone is doing well. So I think it supports more of the collectivist culture than the individualistic culture.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Okay.
Can I ask a question?
Yes, please.
Is like the collectivist versus individual culture, could that kind of relate to like socialism versus capitalism? Because it kind of sounds like that to me. I don't know, I could be way off, but like the ownership of the means of production by the workers versus the like CEOs or owners of the company.
Yeah, interestingly enough, it's very difficult to make that association. Not because it wouldn't seem intuitive. It's just that if we look at the nature of communism versus socialism versus capitalism, right? Communism predominantly says that the government is responsible for the population, period. Mm-hmm. and the population does not get to compete with the government for those services. So if you look at communist countries, they provide educate, they pay for education, people are segregated into groups by, class, but the government is the dictate of all of the rules and regulations for the entire population. In a socialist government, the government is responsible for the infrastructure. So the major programs that will promote the health and welfare for their population is owned by the government. However, as long as an individual does not compete with the government, he or she can still have their own company, own organization, and make their own money. But let's say, for instance, with transportation, since the country runs on transportation, getting goods and services from point A to point B, in a socialist country, someone couldn't start a UPS or a FedEx, right? Because that would compete with the government. However, they can produce the goods that get transported. So that's the difference there. So by nature, the communist group is more collectivist because they control the good and the fortune of everybody. In a socialist group, it's part collectivist because they're looking at the infrastructure that supports the good for the majority of its groups. However, it's individualistic in nature because individuals can also have their own ownership of things. In a capitalist society, then individuals can compete with the government for services. So UPS, DHL, FedEx can compete with the Postal Service. People can have energy companies that compete with state energy companies, right? So that's part of the difference. So you have to look at the nature of it to determine whether it's collectivist or individualistic. It's not as a result of the political system. Did that answer it? Okay.
Yeah, thank you.
You're welcome. So we're going to move a little bit. Let's see, guys, you got to keep me honest because I can talk to a signpost. So let's see. Oh yeah, we're not done until 4:20, so we're still okay. We're close, but we're still okay. All right. So let's transition into gender, right? So now you don't have to answer these, but you can look at these and we will talk about these in more depth. As you can see, we'll cover them in the subsequent chapters. But again, developmentally, we have to look at what is male-female, right? When we look at Freud is going to say that there is a very distinct segregation between male and female, what is expected and what should be accepted. As you move further into, for instance, Dr. Karen Horney, she says, well, it's male-female, but a lot of that is influenced by parents. And then you will get further as we get closer into later research that says it's biologically predisposed. And in most instances, it is definitive male-female, but in other instances, it isn't. So we'll take a look at all of that and how it impacts development socially, culturally, and individually. So let's look at the nature versus nurture question. And whether you've taken, well, I'll say this just in case you haven't taken Psych 200, but nature nurture is a simple distinction. If it is nature, it is genetically predisposed. So there's the presupposition that if it is as a result of nature, then it was genetically predisposed as a part of your genetic makeup that causes you to behave or act or speak or whatever the way that you do. If it's a nurture question, then it means that there was interaction, environmental interaction, social interaction that has influenced you in the way that you think or act or behave. Okay, so that's really the nature versus nurture. So if we look at the nature, biological or genetic causes of development, right? So someone who is larger, that's predisposed as a result of genetic makeup. Someone who gets angry quickly if someone yells at them could be genetic or it could be environmental. If you were a child that whenever your parent or someone around you disagreed, they became angry and yelled and hit or whatever they did. Now, that person may believe that that's the way you're supposed to respond to someone when you're angry or disappointed. So they manifest those behaviors as a result of environmental causes, not necessarily genetic causes. So again, looking at that allows us to predict behavior and also suggest how to intervene to improve the behavior. All right. So behaviorism, and let me ask, and you guys can answer this if you know the answer, but what's the difference between psychodynamic and psychoanalytic? So psychodynamic and psychoanalytic, what's the difference between those two? And then we'll move into behaviorism. No guesses?
I guess my first guess would be that psychodynamism is more focused on the like observation of sort of discrete instances of psychology, and psychoanalytics is observations of like broad strokes, maybe in like a population, like statistics and stuff like that, or focusing more on I don't know. That's
would psychodynamic be more like more broad, like more outside, and then psychoanalytics would be more inside, like subconscious or something?
Ah, that's the word. Okay, so you were both very close, right? So psychoanalytic deals with the subconscious or the unconscious, because, and Freud was the father of the psychoanalytic stuff, but the idea was that there were no instruments that we could use to measure brain activity. There was no experiments that were substantive enough that we could figure out why a particular behavior happened. So the observation statement was absolutely right. Because we can't read people's minds, so the only way that we could discern any meaning to someone's behavior was to observe them. And so psychoanalytic said, because there are unresolved conflicts, there are unresolved needs, there are dissatisfiers that we hold internally, and we manifest our behaviors to represent that. But someone who's really shy with other people may have unresolved issues with relationships or closeness. And so they manifest that by not getting close to people. We were talking earlier in a previous class, we were talking about Ted Bundy. Ted Bundy, of course, after he was found out, had significantly unresolved conflict or issues between himself and women. But he projected that he absolutely loved women. But somehow, when he made the connection, the unresolved conflict and issues surfaced. And then, because now it was a way of controlling women and or making them pay for him having suffered. Well, Freud says, heck, we can't read his mind. So since we can't, what we have to do is observe their behaviors and look to see, well, not even the behaviors, but we have to trust that they're telling us what the problems were. And then based on that, we try to do something therapeutic. Psychodynamic does the same thing. It says we still have this unconscious influx. However, that influx can be changed based on the environments and cultures that we associate in. So one was simply about the individual and his or her thoughts. The other was about the individual, his and her thoughts, as it related to their environment and culture. So that was still the unconscious. So behaviorism went further and said, look, if we can study someone's behavior, we can do a couple of things. We can condition their behavior so that we always get a tentative result, or we can create conditions to allow us to determine when we can expect a certain result. So Skinner, B.F. Skinner, and Pavlov worked with conditioning, classical and operant conditioning, and we'll talk about that in a moment. But he worked with those particular ideas to try to figure out how behavior was caused by either external or internal influence. So traditional behaviorists believed a few general laws of learning could explain behavior from infancy through teens. And again, it's about conditioning. Classical conditioning is about those innate things, those nature things that cause us to respond. And operant conditioning is more environmental, and we respond to consequences, good or bad. If they're good, we respond and we continue that similar response. If they're bad, then we discontinue that similar response. So feelings and thoughts cannot be studied because inner experiences can't be observed. So even with neuroscience, with neurology, we can see which areas of the brain is activated as a result of certain emotions, feelings, interactions. However, there's no way yet to discern exactly what connections are being made to represent thought. So the behaviorist said, well, let's then create conditions that will allow us to promote behavior, and dependent on the response that we get, we can associate the conditions with the behavior, with the response. Okay, so let me ask a quick question, and you can actually, if you would, put this in the chat room. How many did have Psych 200? So you can just respond by yes or no. Okay.
What was the question?
If you if you've previously taken an introductory psych class. Okay. All right. So since I have the majority no, and that's not a bad thing, folks, so please don't take it that way. What I want to do, if the majority had taken an introductory psych, then I would skim through this operant conditioning and stuff. But since you haven't, I want to expand on it a bit. And let's see, we're at 4:01. So we'll do this, and this is where we'll end the day with classical and operant conditioning. Because again, I think those who are going into nursing or engineering or whatever, understanding how we can condition someone to perform a certain way becomes valuable. Even in response, if it's as simple as if I want someone to be cordial, I can start with a smile. And it's as simple as the position of your fingers.
Does this only?
Yes.
Sorry.
No, please go.
Does this only work on adults, or would this also like work on children as well? Is this like?
Absolutely. This is anyone.
Got it.
And matter of fact, including animals.
Good to know.
Yeah. So something as simple as when a salesperson comes to your home, well, they did before COVID-19, but if you sat and the salesperson was talking to you, if he or she was trained in advanced recognition, if your fingers are separated, then it means that you are more receptive to their offer, simply by having your fingers separated. If your hands are closed, it points out that you are less receptive, and it's a lower probability that they're going to make a sale. So something as simple as that becomes an innate response behaviorally. So let's look at these two, and I'm going to bring up the whiteboard because I will put this here. I'll minimize that. Okay, so let's start with classical conditioning. And again, we won't spend a lot of time, but I think enough to at least explain it. Classical conditioning tends to be innate stimulus an innate response. Effectively meaning that you don't have to learn it, you do it naturally. One of the things that is really natural that you should recognize is when you get hungry, there are two things that happen really naturally. A lot of things happen, but two that you're consciously aware of when you are hungry. What might those two things be?
Your stomach growls.
Okay, so stomach can growl. What's the other?
You salivate.
I'm sorry?
You salivate.
Yes, yes. Your mouth gets watery because part of the salivation not only has enzymes that helps break down food, but it also coats the channel to your stomach. So when you are hungry, you start to salivate. So Ivan Pavlov said, there are natural things that happen if given the right conditions, and we don't get a choice in it. So he says there are unconditional stimuli that cause an unconditional response. Not unlike the question I just asked. So the unconditional stimuli, because you don't have to think about being hungry. Your body tells you when you're hungry because there's the absence of substance. And when you're hungry, you automatically salivate. Nobody has to say, oh, look, Kayla, you're hungry, so salivate. Nobody has to tell you that. You do it automatically. And even your stomach growling, because that's a natural state. It's not something that you learn, it just happens. And so Pavlov says, well, if we have these natural things that occur in our bodies, what if we try to condition someone to a similar response? So he said, what if we take something that is neutral in nature, neutral stimulus, and the neutral stimulus is simply something that without conditioning would not cause the expected response.
Is
Guys,
this the dog experiment?
It is. It absolutely is. They've done it with dogs. They've done it with birds. They've done it with multiple animals in training or conditioning them to certain responses. Think of dogs that are explosive dogs. They can smell explosives, right? So, but they don't do that naturally. So they have to be conditioned to recognize something that will cause a response. So if explosives are associated with danger, or because a dog automatically can sense fear. And when a dog senses fear or a challenge, that dog barks. And there is a prescriptive bark that the dog uses to identify danger or, something like that, or a threat. Well, if I can associate explosives with that natural event, then they will bark the same way for either event. Yeah, David.
I was a dog trainer. I can clarify that a little bit.
Okay, yeah, please share with us a little.
So the dogs are just trained to respond in a positive way, right? So like you'll give a dog a treat when he sits. Like the odor is associated with the treat or the toy. It's a positive response. It's passive. So
yeah, and I'll add that, and I'm going to use that some more because that's a form of operant conditioning, but it still works. That is a conditioning factor, so you get someone to respond to something that's considered positive or not respond when something's negative. So yes, absolutely, and that's a great example. So with the classical conditioning, though, because it's still something natural, then I salivate because I'm hungry. So the hunger is the stimulus that causes the response, which is salivation. Well, as someone mentioned, the dog experiment, they used a sound or a bell. But what they wanted to do was cause the dog to salivate to the sound and not just to the absence of food. So prior to that, the bell did not cause the dog to salivate. So again, what we're trying to do is get a natural response to now a learned condition. So what they started doing was whenever they put the food out for the dog, they would ring the bell. So the key to classical conditioning is that you pair an unconditioned stimuli with a neutral stimulus.
In
So
this
now
situation,
I'm sorry, go ahead.
sorry.
No, go
In
ahead.
this situation, would the sound be the neutral stimulus or would that be the treat?
No, the neutral
The food.
stimulus is the sound.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, because the bell that they were using didn't cause the dog to salivate. So that's why it was considered neutral. It doesn't cause the response, the expected response. So by pairing these two, though, now by taking the hunger or the food, and every time the dog would see the food, they would ring the bell. So now this conditioning was the dog would learn that the bell or the food represented satisfaction of the hunger. And so the dog would come whether it heard the bell or saw the food. So what they started doing is let's test it. So they removed the food and would just ring the bell. The dog would still come to eat even though there was no food there. Now there are several stages that include this, but we won't discuss those today. But this is a basic premise for classical conditioning. What David shared with us
I
is a
have two
form of.
questions. I had two questions. Can you change an unconditional stimulus? Like if he's salivating, can you change that? Or is that impossible to change?
Generally, I will say it is not impossible, but it's highly improbable because it's a genetic function.
Yeah, it's something evolutionary.
It's a genetic function. So it's highly improbable that you can change that particular response mechanism.
And if they gave, when the dog got the treat, which was a positive thing for the dog because it was hungry, what if instead of a neutral stimuli, they use a negative stimuli? Would it still result in the same at the end? It would still have positives?
What would you consider a negative stimuli?
Like I guess a little shock or something painful in order to get a treat.
Yeah, you can do that because we also have an innate response to pain, right? So if you associate the two, then the dog may still say, you know what, I get a shock, but that shock also means I get food, right? So yeah, so you can have a negative association to create a desired response, but most often in a classical way, because it's already genetically predisposed, it's hard to change that. You can add in whatever stimulus you want. But in operant conditioning, when you mentioned treat, the word treat means there's a reward that is external to our nature. So now it becomes nurture. So operant conditioning is as a result of consequences. And as David shared about training the dog, if the dog did something correct, then the dog would get a treat. And so operant conditioning says the consequence is either going to be positive or negative, and it's either going to be reinforced or punished. Now, in either of these, the activity is to add something or take something away. Okay. So think of it this way. You guys take your first exam and you do really well. And so it was because you studied, right? And maybe an hour a day, I don't know. But someone says, as long as you're doing well, you know what? I'm going to take care of dinner. I'm going to do all the chores. I'm going to do whatever. So they're adding something to reinforce your behavior. So I can add something to reinforce your behavior, or I can take something away. But I still want you to repeat. So I'm reinforcing. If I'm reinforcing, that means I want to increase the probability that the behavior will continue. So I could also say, you know what, you know what, you're working really hard in the school, and you've been doing the dishes and outside cutting the lawn. Well, if it's going to help you continue to do well in school, I'll take away that chore. I'll have somebody else do it, or I will do it. So in either case, adding something like dinner or taking something away like a chore still reinforces the probability that you will continue that behavior because the consequence is positive. If you're doing something that I don't want you to do, then I would offer a form of punishment, not physical punishment, but again, adding or taking something away. So let's say that you're not doing well in school because you continue to go out at night partying with your friends. So I can add something to say, well, you know what? If you're not doing well in school, then you pay for your own gas, you pay your own tuition. And some of you may be doing that anyhow. But that simply is an example that if I add something to decrease the probability that you will continue that behavior. So if you want me to pay for your gas or you want your tuition paid for, then you have to change that behavior. Stop doing what you're doing, which is not getting good grades. I can also take something away because I just took something away because I took away the gas and the tuition payment. But I can add something to it by saying, you know what, you're not doing well in school. So instead of me just taking away the payments, you got to pay your own. So now I'm adding something to the equation to cause you to decrease the probability of that behavior, right? So it simply depends on if I want you to continue the behavior or discontinue the behavior. If I want you to continue, I reinforce by adding or taking something away. If I don't want you to continue the behavior, I do that by adding or taking something away. But notice the difference. The difference here is with classical conditioning, I don't care if you like the response, right? I don't care if the dog likes the food, is happy with the food, not happy with the food. All I want to know is that you respond to the conditions that I set up. With operant conditioning, it's as a result of the consequence. So I do want to know whether it is positive or negative. Because if I take your tuition away and your gas money, but it doesn't matter to you, then of course the condition had no impact. So I need to know that there's something that will cause that impact. So let me see, someone put something in the chat. Let me make sure I don't miss anything. Okay, definitely, please. Okay. All right, blah, blah. You read my mind. Okay, I don't think that was for me. All right, okay, yeah, start a group chat. Okay, I got it, great. Okay, so looking at those two, and again, I know that's a brief overview of those two conditions, but as we go back to this slide, operant condition, according to traditional behavior, it's B.F. Skinner, the law of learning that determines any voluntary response. Rewarded responses are reinforced, which means the probability to continue a behavior increases, or unreinforced responses cause a decrease in the probability of that behavior continuing. Okay. So last statement, and then we will close for today without any questions. If there are any, I'll address those. The extinction. So let's say that you were getting a reward, but now it doesn't hold the same value. Then your behavior may diminish because you're not getting a reward of value. The behavior or the reward now has extinguished because it's not of value to continue the same behavior. All right. So I know that was, again, a quick overview, but any questions on operant or classical conditioning? Yes, ma'am.
On extinction, you mentioned the example of rewards, and then it just doesn't hold the same value. Would that be the same thing when let's say a child gets spanked because they did something bad, and then the parent just resorts to spanking all the time, then the child's going to be like, learn that no matter what they do, they get spanked, and then it doesn't change their behavior anymore. Would that be the same thing?
That's a perfect example. That's a perfect example, because now the response is not dependent on the consequence anymore. It doesn't matter. You know, it's like a child when you say, you know, go to your room. Okay. Right. At one point, it may have had value, but now, I'll go to my room because I don't have to deal with you. Right. So sometimes you have to change the response equation so that it continues to provide a benefit to the person or the recipient, so they will change their behavior. Yeah. Any others?
Thank you.
You're
Can I ask a
welcome.
question? Oh.
Yeah, absolutely.
Oh, sorry. Wait, were you still talking?
I was just kind of clarify. So the apparent conditioning basically is like making enforcing something and not caring whether they abide by it or not, and then reinforcing is them getting a reward for it. Was that correct?
No.
Opposite. Is it opposite?
Well, no, it's not totally correct. I mean, you were on the right
Okay.
track. Okay,
Right,
so
right.
there's either reinforcement or punishment, right? But in both, in either instance, you're doing one of two things. If it's reinforcement, you're trying to increase the probability of a behavior continuing.
Okay.
And if it's punishment, you're trying to decrease the probability of a behavior continuing. So, so let's use the example, let's see, a child getting up on time, right? Let's say that the bus comes, and if they're not there in time for the bus, they get left, and I have to get up, get dressed, and take them to school.
Okay.
Well, if they're getting up on time, maybe the reinforcement is, I'll have breakfast for you. I'll have lunch packed for you. Well, if those things are of value to the child, then he or she will probably continue to get up on time. So they get that reward. But let's say that they aren't getting up in time. So now I may want to change that behavior of them not getting up on time. So maybe as a result of them staying up late watching television or playing Xbox or something like that, I take that away. I take it away and I said, you know, you don't get it back until you start getting up on time.
Okay, I understand now. That makes more sense. Thank you.
Okay. No, you're more than welcome.
Better.
Yeah. Okay. Yes.
I think you've already said this, so I'm sorry, but is there a textbook for this class?
Yes, it is Lifespan, Experiencing the Lifespan by Janet Belsky. And actually you can access the syllabus and it'll give you the name, and I think it might also have ISBN, but it's Experiencing the Lifespan. Again, if you're a psychology major or nursing major, you may want to get the book because it has a lot of great information. If you're an engineering major or something like that, and psychology is a second nature for you, then you could rent the book, because you can rent it for up to 4 months, I believe.
Okay, cool. Thank you.
Yeah, but the syllabus will have it indicated in there.
What edition is it?
I have, let me see which one I have. See, I've got the latest, which is the 5th edition, but you can get the 4th edition, you know, if it's less expensive, because there are subtle changes between the 4th and 5th edition. So if it's less expensive to get the 4th, you'll still get the majority of the information that we're going to discuss.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Hi, Professor. I had 2 quick questions about the way the course is set up.
Yes.
Are we going to get a course calendar for like the dates of the tests and the assignments? Or are they just
Yeah,
going to be like
actually, I put that in the syllabus last night.
Okay.
I think if you look, well, it wouldn't have been there yesterday, but I think if you look at it today, I put the syllabus on the expected date for each of the exams. And I also put the date for the assignments.
Awesome, thank you. And then the second question is, for attendance, I saw that it's going to be part of the participation.
Yes.
So I'm not sure if I missed attendance today, but I was here. How is that going to be graded? Because I saw the exams are basically 60%, and then like everything, participation wasn't part of that for the class?
Yeah, no, participation, the way that and I'm not expecting everybody to speak, but some people just don't like speaking. So that's why I ask you periodic questions and have you put it in the chat. So if you are mentally in attendance, then when I ask you to put something into the chat box, you can simply respond, with the yes, no, or something like that. So I look at those responses. Because I record the classes, I get a printout of all of the interaction from the chat room. So I simply use that, and those who have responded to the chats, when I ask those specific questions, then you're in attendance. And so
Okay.
at the end of the semester, and it doesn't have to be 100%, but I would like for it to be at least 80%. And if I see that 80% of the time you responded when I ask a question, I will assume that you were mentally present.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Professor, I have a question.
Yes.
Do we need to use a launch pad?
No.
Okay.
Yeah, if that's an additional expense, I wouldn't buy it. And it's not that I'm averse to it. I mean, if you're someone, again, if you're a psychology major and you just want to get as much of this as you can, but we're going to cover almost every aspect of the book. So it's not something that I've ever bought, but I won't say not to, but I don't think you necessarily need it.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Okay. All right. Well, thanks, guys. I really appreciate it. And thanks for the interaction. It definitely makes it easier. So have a great weekend. And I will look forward to seeing you guys on Monday.
Awesome. Thank you, Professor.
You're welcome.
Thank you.
Thank
You're welcome.
you.
Have a great day. You're welcome.
Thank
Take
you.
care. Bye-bye.
Professor,
Yes.
I have a kind of like a personal question.
Okay.
If I have a 5-year-old who I'm normally watching, like she's with me all the time, and normally she's pretty good about my classes, but today like she was very just needy and it was kind of hard for me to focus. If that's ever the case, would it be okay for me to watch the videos later? Like today she kind of settled down quickly, but sometimes it's, I don't know. I don't know if it's the time of day or what, but sometimes it's just very difficult for me to focus.
Well, I mean, if it poses an issue for you, I mean, I'm okay with you having her sit in your lap. Because you can mute your microphone.
Yeah.
Yeah, you can do that. But if you need to, escape for a little while, just put in the chat box, child escape, and I'll know what that means.
Okay. Thank you so much.
Yeah, you'll be fine. Kayla.
Oh yeah. So are you gonna be like sending us these videos after every like lesson then?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay.
I actually already put one out there. I think I sent an email with the
Yeah,
link.
the one from last class.
I'm sorry?
The one from last class.
Yes.
Okay. Yeah.
Yep. And so what I will do is once I finish the class, this one, it will process the video. Once the video is processed, I'll then convert it to a YouTube video, and I'll send you the link for this one as well.
Okay. Thank you.
You're welcome. Have a good day.
You too.
All right. Bye. Bye-bye. Rochelle, did you have a question?
I can unmute myself. When you send out the video, is the chat line going to be in there in the video as well?
No.
And not in the recording?
No. I don't think the chat's in the recording, because I've looked at the ones that I converted to YouTube, and it only takes the video.
Okay.
Yeah, the
a lot of
text.
people put their phone numbers in there, and I was trying to write them all down.
Yeah, I don't think so. The text, there is a text document, but that's separate from the video.
How do we do that? How do we get the text of the chat?
If you want the text, just let me know, because I download all of them. And if it's something, again, is this for the group chat you guys are creating?
Yeah, so everybody was putting their phone numbers in.
Okay.
And I mean, unless we write them down, how do we, I mean, I can't remember all those numbers. I can't remember my kids' phone numbers. So
No, I'm with you. And I'm okay with that, as long as because they put it in the chat, which means it's okay. Now, I'll only share it with the class, but if you will send me an email and say, here's the group, or you know what? I'll look at the chat, and for anyone who put their phone number in, I'll create a group email, and I'll only send it to you guys, because if they didn't put their phone number in there, then I'm going to assume that they didn't want to share that openly or publicly.
Okay.
Yeah, but if you'll send me an email, I'll send it to you, and if you want to send it out to the group, that's fine.
Okay. Yeah. Because like I said, I couldn't get them all written down, and I'm old, so I'm trying to figure out what this WhatsApp is, but I'll have one of my kids figure it out for me and get that set up, because since we're not in person, I guess they're going to be doing study groups
they'll be
that way.
like a duo call, because you can do a face-to-face with WhatsApp, but you can also it's also a text. It's like Messenger.
Okay, so you do it through your phone number, not through like Facebook or.
No, you can do it on your phone. Like when you go to the place, do you have a Droid or Apple?
Android.
So when you go to the Play Store,
Mm-hmm.
when you go to the Play Store, just type in WhatsApp.
Okay.
And when you type it in, it'll say, download or install, blah, blah. So
Okay.
you can do it. You can do it on your phone. You can also do it on your computer.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, that would work.
And then you'll be good to go. But yeah, send me an email and remind me, and I'll take the text once it's processed, and I'll send that to you so that you can have all of those numbers, and then you guys can make contact as you see fit.
All right. Thank you so much. I appreciate it.
You're welcome. Take care.